In the heart of southern West Virginia, there's a place where time doesn't move like it should. The roads twist like veins through the hills, cracked and narrow, leading not just to forgotten towns but to entire bloodlines lost to history. This is Odd, West Virginia, a name that feels more like a warning than a town. They call this hollow the end of the road, a place where generations were born, lived, and died without ever leaving the ridge, where poverty, pride, and isolation wrapped around families like ivy, slow, choking, unbreakable. The Whittakers live here, a family so cut off from the outside world that when strangers come up this way, the dogs bark first, and then the silence swallows everything else. For decades, the Whittakers were known only to locals, whispered about in hushed tones at gas stations and diners. "Don't go up there after dark," they'd say. "Ain't right what's up that road." But no one ever talked about why. Every mountain town has its secrets, but here, those secrets run in the blood. Generations of isolation, marriages within the same kin, and the slow decay of a lineage trapped between loyalty and survival. What began as a family became a phenomenon, a haunting glimpse into what happens when the world forgets a people and they forget it right back. But don't mistake this for a story of monsters. The Whittakers are not horror, they are heartbreak. Their lives are shaped by circumstance, by systemic neglect, by the cruel mathematics of poverty and geography. Theirs is a tale born from silence and sustained by it. Inside that door lies a story that America was never supposed to see, one that blurs the line between curiosity and cruelty, empathy and exploitation. This is where our journey begins. Tonight, we step into the hollow that time forgot, where the echoes of a bloodline still whisper through the mountains. Before we descend deeper into this story, tell me where you're watching from tonight. Somewhere quiet, somewhere far from these hills, because once you enter this hollow, you might not leave the same. And if you believe that every family's story deserves to be heard, hit subscribe and join us here in the shadows of Underbelly Bloodline. Before the Whittakers became a headline, before the photographs and the whispers, they were just another family living off the land that gave them everything and took everything back. This was Appalachia in the early 1900s, a place both fierce and fragile. Families here didn't just live in the mountains, they belonged to them. The mines fed the men, the churches softened the Sundays, and bloodlines ran deep, so deep that generations folded into themselves. The Whittakers came from that soil, hard-working, God-fearing people who believed in kin and survival above all else. Their ancestors worked the seams of coal until the veins ran dry. Poverty moved in like a sickness, slow and quiet. When jobs vanished and roads washed out, so did the way out. The Whittaker name became tied to one hollow, one stretch of broken earth, where the roads narrowed to dirt and the mail barely came. It wasn't a choice to stay, it was a kind of inheritance, one passed down through habit, fear, and familiarity. In a place where neighbors were few, and family was all you had, marriages stayed close. Cousins wed cousins. Brothers' sons courted sisters' daughters. The bloodline looped inward, generation after generation, until it became more a circle than a tree. By the mid-century, whispers spread through nearby towns, stories of strange folks up in Odd, families that spoke in sounds more than words. Some said it was sin, others said it was sickness, but no one ever drove far enough up that dirt road to find out. This wasn't just about inbreeding, it was about entrapment, the kind born from poverty, pride, and generational trauma. When the world forgets a place, its people start to fold inward. The Whittakers didn't set out to be infamous. They were just trying to survive a world that had already left them behind. Tell me, when you hear stories like this, does it make you think about where your family came from? What roads led you here tonight? If you're drawn to the forgotten corners of America, to the stories that live in the silence, subscribe and stay close. By the 1960s, the Whittaker name had become something of a whisper in southern West Virginia, not spoken loud, not spoken often. The family had grown, scattered across a handful of shacks and trailers tucked deep within the woods. Few outsiders ever came that far down the road. Fewer still came back twice. What began as kinship cousins marrying cousins, blood kept close for comfort, slowly turned into a cycle that no one inside could recognize and no one outside could understand. In those hollows, the word family took on a different kind of meaning. It was both shield and chain. The children born into the Whittaker bloodline came into a world already shaped by silence. Some never spoke at all. Others moved through life with simple gestures and sounds, their language as much emotion as communication. They weren't broken. They were surviving in their own kind of code, one the outside world would later mistake for madness. But behind that silence lay something heavier, a generational bruise. Abuse, neglect, mental illness, all hidden behind closed doors, and the unspoken rule of keep it in the family. The Whittakers lived by that rule long after it stopped protecting them. Locals began to talk about those folks up in Odd, the ones who looked and acted different. Stories spread of inbreeding, of deformities, of children who barked instead of spoke. Some tales were exaggerated, others cruelly true. But beneath the rumors was something deeper, the reflection of a society that let the line blur between fascination and neglect. In the Whittaker Hollow, the line between family and fear, love and survival, began to vanish. Generation after generation carried the same burden, the same blood, the same silence, the same unending cycle. No one knew where the tragedy began anymore. It had simply become the way things were. The truth is, no bloodline collapses overnight. It erodes one heartbreak, one silence, one secret at a time, until the past and the present blur together, and no one remembers what normal ever looked like. When you look at the Whittakers' story, where do you think the line blurs between tragedy and choice, between sin and survival? For nearly a century, the Whittakers lived unseen, their world sealed off by dirt roads and indifference. But all it takes is one outsider with a camera to turn silence into spectacle. In 2004, photographer Mark Whittaker drove deep into the Appalachian backcountry, looking for portraits that captured rural America's forgotten edges. He found himself in Odd, West Virginia, standing before the Whittakers' home. What he saw there would haunt him and fascinate millions. The photographs revealed a family unlike any other, raw, unfiltered, shocking. A mix of confusion, silence, and humanity so deep it unsettled anyone who dared to look too long. These images would later go viral, decades after they were taken, transforming the Whittakers from a private tragedy into an international curiosity. But for the Whittakers, there was no internet, no fame, no context. There was only confusion. Cameras came and went, but the life inside that hollow remained unchanged. Cold winters, quiet nights, and the dog's low growls echoing through the yard. Whittaker's lens gave the Whittakers a face, but it also gave the world permission to stare. Millions clicked, watched, judged a digital freak show born from centuries of rural neglect. The same society that ignored Appalachia's suffering now devoured it in high definition, yet behind those viral frames lies something purer, a strange grace. The Whittakers didn't seek pity, they didn't beg for help. They simply lived loyal to each other, loyal to the hollow that raised them. Their silence became their armor, but for those watching, it raised a haunting question. When we point a camera at pain, are we capturing truth or creating it? The Whittakers' story had now escaped Odd, West Virginia. What was once a hidden chapter of Appalachia had become a global headline, a mirror reflecting not just their suffering, but ours. Our fascination with the grotesque, our hunger for tragedy, wrapped in curiosity. In the end, the camera didn't just capture the Whittakers, it changed them, and it changed the way the world would see them forever. Where do you stand on this, friend? When you see a life like theirs, do you feel empathy or something else? If you believe stories like this deserve to be told with truth, not spectacle, stay with me. Because this isn't about the camera, it's about what the world did after it looked. In the Whittaker Hollow, silence isn't just the absence of sound, it's a language all its own, a way of surviving when words can't reach as far as pain does. For most families, communication is conversation, words tossed like pebbles across water. But for the Whittakers, language became something else entirely, a system of grunts, gestures and looks passed between kin who had learned to understand each other without ever needing to explain. Some called it deformity, others called it tragedy. But maybe it was neither. Maybe it was simply adaptation, the way generations learn to live when the world outside stops listening. Because when you grow up in silence, you start to hear things no one else can. The tone of footsteps, the sigh of a door, the way the wind shifts before someone cries. There's beauty in their language, if you know how to look for it. The Whittakers don't speak like the rest of us, because the rest of us stopped speaking to them long ago. Their communication is primal, raw, a living echo of the human instinct to connect, even when the tongue fails. This is what the outside world never understood. When Mark Laita filmed them, millions saw the inbred family that couldn't speak. But they missed what mattered, that behind every grunt was love, behind every gesture was loyalty, behind every silence was history. Appalachia has always spoken in silences, the kind that fill church pews, mountain trails, and kitchen tables where grief is passed down like a family recipe. The Whittakers' silence is part of that same Appalachian code, one built from pride, trauma, and endurance. But silence can protect, and it can poison, because the longer a family lives without being heard, the harder it becomes to tell where dignity ends and damage begins. Maybe the saddest truth is this: their silence wasn't a mystery to solve. It was a wound to understand. When you hear their voices, those grunts, those murmurs, what do you hear? Suffering or survival? If you're someone who listens between the silences, who believes that even the voiceless deserve to be heard, comment yes. Before the world ever called the Whittakers inbred, it called them poor. And in Appalachia, that label is heavier than blood. For generations, families like the Whittakers worked the coal seams and timber mills, trading their bodies for pennies, their lungs for survival. But when the mines shut down and the factories left, poverty didn't. It stayed, like a ghost that never learned how to move on. There's a saying up here: you can't starve a man who's already hungry. But what happens when the hunger isn't just for food, but for a way out? For the Whittakers, the walls of that prison weren't made of bars, they were made of isolation, neglect, and generations of the same repeating story. When you're born in a hollow that the map forgets, the world outside stops seeing you as part of it. The schools fail you, the doctors never come, the government checks arrive late, if at all, and when every path out has been washed away by poverty, the only thing left to hold on to is each other. Even when that love starts to fold inward, turning family into something tangled, something desperate. People like to believe that inbreeding is a choice, that it comes from ignorance or sin. But here in odd West Virginia, it was never that simple. It was geography, it was isolation, it was poverty, breeding poverty, generation after generation, until the family tree stopped growing outward and started circling back in. In this part of Appalachia, the system failed long before the people did. No intervention, no education, no exit. Just another mountain family left behind, while America pretended not to see. This isn't a horror story about bloodlines. It's about what happens when a country decides who's worth saving and who can be forgotten. Poverty is a prison with no guards. The Whittakers never escaped it, because no one ever came to unlock the door. When you see stories like this, do you feel pity or responsibility? If you believe some stories shouldn't stay buried under the mud of history, subscribe and stay with me. Because next, outsiders finally come knocking. And what happens next changes everything. For nearly a century, the Whittaker family had lived in near complete isolation, untouched by the world beyond the ridge. But one day, that world came looking for them, and what it found could never be unseen. The first visitor came not as a neighbor, but as an observer, a photographer named Mark Laita. He didn't come with malice, he came with curiosity. But curiosity, when mixed with tragedy, can be a dangerous thing. Laita's camera found the Whittakers living deep within odd West Virginia, in a home that time had refused to touch. He captured faces marked by hardship, eyes that seemed to hold both innocence and exhaustion. And when those images surfaced years later, the internet reacted not with understanding, but with shock. The world stared, laughed, gawked, A family that had once existed in silence was now being consumed by a global audience, people who called them monsters, freaks, and curiosities, without ever knowing their names, their stories, or their pain. But Laita came back, again and again. Over time, the relationship changed. He brought food, he brought help, he listened. He started to see what the rest of the world refused to, that behind the stares and the silence were people with loyalty, tenderness, and a fierce kind of love that only those bound by suffering could understand. Yet the damage was already done. Once the story left the hollow, it wasn't theirs anymore. It belonged to algorithms, comment sections, and content cycles. The Whittakers became both famous and invisible, known everywhere, yet understood by no one. Some said exposure was mercy, that the videos brought awareness and help. Others said it was exploitation, a cruel spotlight on a family that never asked to be seen. But somewhere in between those two truths lies the real story. When the visitors came, they didn't bring judgment, the world did. And the hollow, once silent, would never be quiet again. So I'll ask you, when someone films a life like this, does it help? Or does it just remind us how far we've drifted from compassion? Because next, we'll step inside the hollow itself and see what truly keeps this family bound together. Not every story inside the hollow is pain. Some are made of small mercies, the kind that only those who've endured too much can still find beauty in. For all the world's fascination with the Whittakers' tragedy, few ever stop to see their tenderness. The way Betty keeps the porch clean, as if order could hold back the years of chaos. The way Ray sits on the steps every morning, whistling for the dogs like clockwork, keeping watch over a family that can no longer tell where the world ends and their hollow begins. This isn't the image that went viral. This is the heartbeat the cameras never captured, the love that doesn't need words, the loyalty that outlived reason. There's a quiet dignity here, the kind that comes from surviving things no one was ever meant to survive. In every gesture, in every glance, you can feel what holds this family together, something deeper than speech, stronger than shame. People online called them monsters, abominations, creatures of the hills. But if you spend enough time listening to the silence, you'll realize something haunting. Monsters don't love like this. Monsters don't protect. Monsters don't laugh at small jokes under the shade of dying trees. This is what poverty and isolation can't kill, the simple, sacred rituals of survival. The heartbeat that says, "We are still here." If you listen close enough, the hollow doesn't sound empty. It breathes. It remembers. It forgives. Maybe the real heartbeat of this place isn't in the bloodline. Maybe it's in the love that refused to die inside it. Tell me when you see them like this. Does it change what you thought you knew? If you believe empathy belongs in every dark corner of history, comment yes, and stay close. In Appalachia, stories live longer than people. They whisper through the valleys, buried in roots and bloodlines, passed down like heirlooms or curses. And in the hills of odd West Virginia, the Whittaker name has become both. Locals don't say much about the family. Some claim the Whittakers were hexed generations ago, not by magic, but by the choices of men and women who couldn't escape each other or themselves. Others say it was poverty that did it, that the curse wasn't supernatural at all, just the slow decay that comes when isolation becomes inheritance. There are whispers of the bloodline curse, a tale as old as the mountains themselves, that every time one Whittaker was born, another piece of the family's sanity was taken, that their hollow was protected by no church, no law, no light, only the echo of its own secrets. But if you listen closely, you start to wonder, was it really a curse? Or was it something more human, a story told by outsiders to make sense of the kind of suffering they didn't want to look at too long? Every generation tried to carry the name forward, but it came with weight, shame, ridicule, pity. When you grow up being treated like a ghost, sometimes you start to believe you are one. Still, a curse only has power if you give it belief. And in the quiet moments between the laughter, the barking dogs, the soft hands of family holding each other through storms, there's proof that the Whittakers never surrendered to the legend. They kept living, kept feeding, protecting, enduring. Because to them, survival was the only prayer that ever worked. Maybe the curse wasn't on the Whittakers at all. Maybe it was on everyone who looked at them, and forgot to see the humanity staring back. Tell me, do you believe curses are real? Or do you think they're just stories we tell to explain what poverty and pain can do to a family's soul? If you've been following this story and feel its weight, and stay with me, because finally this isn't about what was lost, it's about what remains. Every story has an ending, but some, like the Whittakers, don't close cleanly. They fade, like echoes between mountains, refusing to die no matter how hard the world tries to forget them. For generations, this family endured what most could not: poverty, ridicule, and the crushing isolation of a place that swallows its own history. They became symbols, then curiosities, and finally, just names whispered through the digital ether. But here, in the heart of Appalachia, time doesn't move forward, it circles. It brings back memories. It carries voices. The hollow remembers everything. What remains of the Whittakers is not a spectacle. It's a legacy carved from resilience and unspoken will to keep breathing in a world that never asked if they wanted to. This house, this land, these bloodlines, they are not curses. They are survivors. There's a moment, if you stand still long enough in the hollow, when the noise of the world fades. You can almost hear the laughter that once filled these woods, see the smoke from Sunday fires, smell the rain on red clay, and in that moment, you realize they were never the monsters. They were the mirror. America forgot families like the Whittakers long before a camera ever found them. Forgotten places, forgotten people. Yet even in their silence, they tell us something about ourselves, about cruelty, about compassion, about the thin line between survival and shame. And maybe that's what truly remains in the hollow: not tragedy, but truth. A truth too raw to look at, and too human to ignore. If this story moved, you don't just scroll past. Tell their story, share it, because the only way the underbelly heals is when someone finally listens.